What's going on, everybody? Cleepus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the Cricket Ovation 3 about a year after it originally came out and going over whether or not it's still a good phone to buy at this point. Now, as always, if you end up wanting to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description where I am linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Cricket Ovation 3, we're getting a really large 6.82-inch IPS LCD display with a 720p resolution, a PPI of 246, and a 20.5:9 aspect ratio. So on one hand, the image quality may not really be anything special, but first of all, I will say it does look at least decent. So while it's probably not the best if you're constantly on your phone doing stuff like watching videos, playing games, things like that where the image quality is a bit more important, I do think it will at least be okay for the occasional video or something every now and then. So definitely keep this in mind. And also, aside from the image quality, the size and dimensions are great. At 6.82 inches, we are getting a really large display here, and despite this, the phone really doesn't feel bulky at all. So on one hand, you will have the benefits of having a really large display, but on the other hand, it's still, in my opinion, not uncomfortable to hold or put in your pocket or anything like that. So definitely great to see there. And then with a 20.5:9 aspect ratio, we're also getting a tall, narrow form factor. So if you're browsing the web, reading, social media, really doing anything that involves scrolling, with a form factor like this, you can fit plenty of content on the screen without having to scroll too much. And if you're doing something in landscape mode like watching videos or looking at photos, you're going to get a nice immersive experience and things are going to look a bit more cinematic. So in general, if you're looking for a really affordable phone that still has a nice display, I do think the Cricket Ovation 3 is definitely worth considering. Now for storage, with this phone, we're getting 32GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion. So honestly, this is probably the biggest drawback of this phone. In my opinion, 32GB is really just not enough. Sure, if you're really a light user and you're not doing a ton on your phone, then you might get by, but I feel like most people like to have at least a few different apps. And of course, the more apps you get, the more it's gonna add up. So overall, if storage is really a concern to you at all, I would definitely avoid getting this phone. But that being said, of course, going for like $120 full price, if even that, this is definitely not a very expensive phone. So if you are just looking for something for more of the basics, then you might be okay here. And at least, again, this phone does support microSD card expansion. So if you have a lot of photos and videos, for example, you can always offload that stuff onto a microSD card, and this will make a difference. For security features, with the Cricket Ovation 3, we are getting Face Unlock and a fingerprint scanner right here on the back. So definitely nice to get both options, gives you a bit of flexibility. But real quick, let's give the fingerprint scanner a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see there, real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And again, remember, this phone does have Face Unlock too, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now for the camera setup here, with the Cricket Ovation 3, up front, we get an 8-megapixel selfie camera, then on the back, we get a triple camera setup with a 13-megapixel main camera, a 5-megapixel ultra-wide camera, and a 2-megapixel macro camera. So in general, definitely a nice camera setup here, and that's actually pretty surprising considering in this price range, getting both an ultra-wide camera and a macro camera is definitely less common. But again, this phone does have both, so if you like to get those wider angle photos and close-up detailed images at the same time, then you will be happy with this phone. And honestly, for what it is, really not very many entry-level phones are like this, so again, definitely impressive here. Now when it comes to the photo quality, on one hand, if you really know what to expect from a phone like this, then you're not going to have any problem. But at the same time, maybe you're coming from a slightly older but higher end device. And that kind of situation, it might feel like a pretty big downgrade, but honestly, for what it is, I do think the photo quality is at least okay. So in general, if you are looking for a really affordable device and you do want a nice camera, for most people, the Cricket Ovation 3 will be good enough. Now to give you an idea of what the camera can do, here's some pictures taken with the Cricket Ovation 3. And again, overall, I feel like for what it is, the photo quality here is pretty good. So if you are generally looking for something really affordable, but at the same time, you still want to be able to take a nice photo when you need to, I do think for what it is, the Cricket Ovation 3 will definitely be a good choice, especially considering, again, we are getting an ultra-wide camera and a macro camera here. So in addition to having decent photo quality, it does have a good variety of camera features too. Now for the RAM and processor, with the Cricket Ovation 3, we're getting 3GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio A25 processor. Now in general, for what it is, I wouldn't really call this a slow phone. I mean, compared to other phones like this, for example, the Motorola Moto G Play 2023, that phone is a bit more expensive than this one actually, and honestly the Ovation 3 is a bit faster. So yeah, it's definitely not the slowest phone out there, but if you're really gonna be on your phone all the time, especially doing more demanding activities, you will want to get something a bit faster because it's really not meant for super heavy use. It's really here for stuff like watching YouTube videos, browsing the web, checking your email and social media, and then just using the phone as a phone. So for that kind of use, I personally haven't had any performance issues and things do run pretty well. But of course, if you're going to be using your phone all the time, especially for more heavy things like higher performance mobile gaming and stuff like that, you will want to get something a bit faster. For the battery, with the Cricket Ovation 3, we're getting a 4000 mAh battery that also supports 10-watt fast charging. So on one hand, not the greatest battery, but in my experience, it's actually a lot better than it sounds. Now, you might be wondering why a 4000 mAh battery would be relatively unimpressive, but keep in mind at this point, I want to say the vast majority of phones in general have 5000 mAh batteries, and usually a bit better fast charging too. So considering that, even in this price range, you can pretty easily find a phone that has a much larger battery. So if the battery is a main priority for you, then you probably will want to get something else. But honestly, in my experience, the battery life here is really not bad. I mean, I usually let this phone die out and I don't charge it until then, and it does last for quite a while, sometimes multiple days depending on what I'm doing with it. So overall, for most people, especially if you're getting a phone like this, I mean, like I said before, this phone is really not meant for heavy use anyway. The processor is just not fast enough. So for the things most people are probably going to be using this phone for anyway, the battery life should be good enough. Now for the software, with the Cricket Ovation 3, unfortunately this phone does only have Android 12, which honestly is not really that surprising considering it came out at the end of 2022. And when it comes to Cricket branded phones, they typically don't get major updates. At least I've never seen it happen, so if you are looking for a phone that has a newer software, getting a phone with Android 12 is probably not the best choice. But when it comes to phones like these, I feel like a lot of people really just don't care about the software anyway. So if that's you, then just keep in mind, I personally haven't had any performance issues with this phone. Things do run pretty well, so overall I would say it's not really that bad. And then also keep in mind, with the Cricket Ovation 3, despite being a really low-end device, we are actually getting NFC here. So if you like to use tap and pay, keep in mind with this phone, you can use that feature no problem. But in conclusion, my general thoughts about the Cricket Ovation 3 about a year after it originally came out. Now on one hand, when it comes to the specs and features, there's not really a whole lot that's particularly impressive here, but at the same time, it's definitely not a terrible option either. I would say the biggest drawbacks here are, first of all, the storage. Again, 32 gigabytes for most people is really not that much. So if you are someone who downloads a lot of apps and games and stuff like that, you will probably have a bit of trouble. And in addition to this, the software again is kind of outdated. I mean, Android 12 isn't terrible, but at the same time, I mean, it is starting to get a bit older. So on one hand, if you don't really care about the software, then again, this is not really gonna matter. But I feel like if you're really going out of your way to get a new phone anyway, you might as well get a decently newer software too. But of course, not everyone is really gonna care too much. But on the other hand, a couple good things about this phone are, first of all, again, the display is really large. So if you're doing a lot of reading, for example, this is definitely going to be a good thing for you. And then the camera is pretty impressive, honestly. Sure, the photo quality isn't insane or anything, but getting an ultra-wide camera and a macro camera in a phone like this, while not being that rare, is still definitely a bit less common at this point. So I feel like that is something worth keeping in mind. And then again, this phone does have NFC, so that is pretty cool too. So on one hand, if you're expecting really fast performance, a really premium, high quality looking image, a super large battery, and the latest version of Android, this is definitely not the phone for you. But on the other hand, if you're looking for something more basic for more light daily use, the Cricket Ovation 3 is still worth considering. Now once again, if you want to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.